Dante's Purgatorio, Part 3, Cantos 23 through 33. So this is, again, an image of what Purgatory looks like. According to Dante, it's a mountain that rises out of the south side of the earth. It has 7 terraces, one for each of the cardinal sins and virtues, where people are cleansed of these sins and acquire these virtues: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, lust. And on the virtue side, humility, mercy, peace, solicitude, generosity, abstinence, chastity. And at the top is the earthly paradise, which is like the Garden of Eden. Here's a further back view of the whole setup of the world, according to Dante's poem. You have the earth here at the bottom, which is divided into 2 hemispheres. The hemisphere on the north, the green part, of water, the hemisphere on the north, which is of land, and the hemisphere in the south, which is the ocean. And in the center of the hemisphere of land is the city of Jerusalem here, and right underneath the city of Jerusalem is a little cave that goes down into hell, which is this huge underground pit that spirals down to the center of the earth, where Satan is frozen in the center of the earth. And then there's this cave that goes up to the other side of the world, which leads you to the mountain of Purgatory on the opposite side of the world from Jerusalem, which is the mountain that ascends towards heaven, and where people can purge themselves of their sins and slowly make their way up towards heaven. Then you have the Garden of Eden at the top of that, and then you have heaven itself, which is represented by the planets, starting with the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then ultimately, notice it's lined up with the sun, is what's called the Empyrean, which is where God himself is. Okay, so that's the overall view. So going Canto 23, the 6th terrace of Purgatory is for the gluttons. The penitent gluttons pass the 3 poets who are now emaciated from the tempting smells of the tree. Okay, so on this level of paradise, there is a tree, and the tree is like the tree in the Garden of Eden. There's actually 2 trees on this level of paradise that are like the trees from the Garden of Eden. The tree of the Garden of Eden, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. All right, the tree that tempted Adam and Eve to eat from it. And in the same way, these gluttons are tempted to eat from these trees, but they can't. Their punishment is that they can never eat from it. This tree emits a smell which is very tasty, and they want to eat from it. They desire it badly, and they wander around the tree, but they can never eat from it. So these gluttons are emaciated now, which means that they've lost all their flesh, and I should say they haven't literally lost their flesh, but what's happened is their body fat has basically all gone away from not being able to eat hardly anything. They're just skin and bones, so to speak. And they are emaciated. So one of the people that he meets here is named Maurice Donati, who is an old friend of Dante's, and thanks to their respective experiences in the afterlife, both of them have had their characters improved since Maurice's death parted them 5 years earlier. Canto 24. He has conversations with the gluttons, and Dante shares his poetic secrets. Dante talks with Maurice, whose sister Piccarda is already in heaven, and we'll meet her later, and whose brother, the faction leader Corso Donati, will soon be on his way to hell for leading one of the political factions that fights in Italy. Then he starts to talk about poetry with somebody else that he meets there named Bonagiunta, who asks him for the secret of his dolce stil novo, or the sweet new style that Dante writes in poetry, which he's quite proud of. And you notice that throughout all of these things, Dante has a tendency to bump into lots of poets, starting with Virgil, and then there's Statius, but there's also these more minor characters that are other poets that he just happens to bump into and strike up conversations with them. And this particular poet, Bonagiunta, admires Dante's sweet new style of poetry, and and also the generation of poets that he identifies with. So Dante simply says that when he feels love, he takes note of his own feelings and then accurately puts them on the page. Nothing more to it. The gluttons speed ahead on their journey, and Dante and Virgil and Statius pass a second tree where a voice cites examples of people undone by gluttony. Another dazzling angel removes a sixth pea from Dante's forehead and sends him up to the final terrace. So the final terrace will be for lust. And, thinking back to hell, you might remember that in a lot of ways the order that was in hell was very similar to the order in Purgatorio, but everything's in reverse. One of the very first levels of hell, the least punishment other than limbo, was for those who were lustful, and then the gluttonous, and then the greedy, and then and so forth. So there's a lot of parallels between hell and purgatory, but they're almost like polar opposites of each other. They're like inversions of each other. All right, so Canto 20. Okay, so Canto 25 is for this is where he enters the seventh terrace, which is the terrace for cleansing lust or illicit sexual desire. As they climb the stairs, Dante asks about the nature of the soul. Statius explains how when a child is conceived, a soul is created by God. So this is in the womb. So he explains that through the union of the man and woman, the semen is like a type of blood that Dante says that the blood of the man and woman mix together and create the embryo, which then God, once the brain is developed, God implants the embryo with a soul. And the soul is immortal and endowed with free will, importantly, and fuses with the faculties in the womb. The bodily faculties are thus joined with the higher faculties. Those of the mind. And when the person dies, all of those faculties survive. So this was, Dante's showing a bit of his scientific knowledge here, but also just his idea of how the afterlife works, how people survive into the afterlife. Because there was another prevalent idea taken from Aristotle in medieval times that the the soul of a person was not really in any part of their body. It was rather a part of the universal knowledge, kind of like the universal being, kind of like God, right? So this is an idea that's a little different and probably not as compatible with Christianity, but was somewhat prevalent in the Middle Ages, and but Dante here is rejecting that idea and saying, no, the soul is actually in the body. It's in the organs of the body itself, and he puts it in with the brain. And so when the person dies, they don't just kind of merge into the universal being, but they remain an individual, and they go to hell or to purgatory or heaven as that individual. So an imprint of the body at the moment of death creates a shade, which causes the soul to continue to have organs and physical form. So because the shade basically has the same mind and thoughts as the person who died, minus the body, they develop, the shade has still the same characteristics of that person and develops them in the air, so to speak. So this explains the reason and the means for purgation of the sins of the flesh, right? Because kind of the question would be, why, if the if these shades were just spiritual and not physical, if they didn't have physical bodies, why are they being cleansed of sins of the flesh like lust and gluttony? So Stadius finishes as they arrive on the seventh terrace, filled with fire, which is there to purge the people there of lust. The lustful spirits within the fire cry out examples of chastity, the opposite of lust. And I should point out that Dante suffered from two major sins, which he admits to in the book, and that is lust and pride, kind of on the two opposite ends of purgatory. And he knows those are his two major weaknesses. So, Canto 26, the flames of the seventh terrace, or lust, and more conversation with poets. Dante, Stadius, and Virgil have to pass carefully between the flames and drop the edge of the drop at the edge of the terrace. So there's a flame against the side of the mountain, and then there's the path they're walking on, and then on the other side there's a cliff that they don't want to fall off of. Perceiving that he has a shadow, the souls in the fire are amazed at Dante, and Dante finds himself talking to two more poets who greatly influenced him, Guido Gunicelli and Arnaut Daniel. So part of Dante's problem with lust is that as a poet, he's involved in the writing style of the troubadours, which involves courtly love, right? And we had talked about courtly love early on when we started the book, and that's the idea that a knight would basically fall in love with a woman who was unobtainable, at least not legally obtainable, because probably she was somebody else's wife. The best example being like Lancelot and Guinevere, who was married to King Arthur. And so Dante realizes that he kind of holds this type of thought or ideal in his mind also, and needs to be purged of it. And you can tell that in a way when Beatrice comes up, which she's going to be coming up more as time goes on here, that he's obsessed with her in that way. But what he needs to do here is to purify his love for Beatrice from being a lustful type of love into being a type of love, of a divine type of love, a type of love like a love between Christians for each other that is not in any way evil. Canto 28. So an angel tells Dante that he must pass through the flames to continue. So there's this wall of flames, and the souls that are being cleansed of lust are being burned in the flames to purify them of the lust. And in order to continue on his journey upwards up the mountain, he will actually have to pass through the flames along with Virgil and Statius. And just to remind you, so he's with two poets right now, and he has been for a while, since a few levels down. He's been with Virgil since hell, but Statius joined them, and he was also an ancient Roman poet who, it turns out, had become a Christian before he died, and that therefore he's now on his way to heaven, which you might remember Virgil can't go that far. And so Virgil is going to be ending his journey pretty soon because he will need to return to limbo. He can never enter heaven. But Statius will. And of course, Beatrice already has. And that's where he's heading. So Dante is afraid and reluctant to go through the wall of flames, as he knows that will hurt a lot, only stepping forward when Virgil reminds him that the flames are all that is standing between him and Beatrice. And so you can see that Dante still has this desire for Beatrice. And it's interesting because he's going to be cleansed on this level from lust, right? And yet, it's in a way, it might be his lust for Beatrice that is the only thing that draws him into the flames to be purified of it. But, I think also there's some truth to this even in real life, right? Is that often, we might go after something that is not quite right, but in the process, somehow God uses that to bring us to the truth in a better way than we were before. So, the experiences of our life, even the bad ones, are often used in a way that can help us in the long run. So the agony of the fire that Dante is going through purges Dante of his lust. And presumably his lust for Beatrice he's rid of that, and he's left only with a pure love. And he sets off up the final stairway with Virgil and Statius. Night falls, and, unable to go any further, they sleep on the steps. Dante here on the steps dreams of Leah, the wife of Jacob, and Rachel, the wife of Jacob. And so Leah and Rachel, and also Mary and Martha from the New Testament, are representative of the active life of work and the life of contemplation of, for instance, like religious people, religious nuns and monks. And like in the stories from the Bible, both of them are seen as virtuous. The active life of work is virtuous, and the contemplative life is virtuous. But the contemplative life is seen as being superior. You might remember Jesus says that Martha complains that Mary's not doing any work, right? She's just contemplating Jesus. And Jesus says, well, Mary has actually chosen the better thing, the contemplative life, and what she has chosen will not be taken away from her. Here's a picture of the wall of flames that Dante passes through. And then here's a picture of them making their bed on the stairway the final stairway up to the earthly paradise, or the Garden of Eden. So the next morning they climb to the top of the stairs, and Virgil announces that his role as Dante's guide is over. So Virgil has been Dante's guide from the very beginning of hell all the way up to the top level of Purgatory. They've now arrived at the very top level, which is the earthly paradise, or we might just say the Garden of Eden. And Virgil's role is over. He is ultimately a pagan, a great pagan philosopher, or a poet who, although he has lots of knowledge and lots of understanding, can never go beyond this. He can never go beyond the top of the Mount Purgatory into heaven, and so he is no longer going to be the guide from here on. He says at this point Dante's will has been purified, and therefore he is ready to follow his heart without fear of going astray. So in other words, he doesn't need Virgil anymore. Dante is ready to lead himself now, to use his free will to determine the right way to go. Canto 28. The Garden of Eden at the top of Mount Purgatory. He meets Matilda. This is Matilda in the picture. So Dante wanders in amazement into the enchanted forest at the top of Mount Purgatory until he reaches a clear stream that blocks his path. On the far side of the stream is a beautiful woman who is picking flowers, like Leah was in the dream that he had about Leah and Rachel. And her name is Matilda, and she represents the active life. So Matilda had been the name of the noble lady who owned a castle in 1077, where Pope Gregory was staying when the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, who had a big conflict with the Pope at that time, made his way, and I think he was under an interdict from the Pope, made his way barefoot across the mountains in the snow and doing penance, and asked the Pope to forgive him, and was forgiven. So it was through her intercession partly that the emperor was reconciled to the Pope, or that the church was reconciled to the state. And so Matilda represents a person who helps to reconcile the church and the state, or the empire and the church, something that Dante thought was very badly needed, especially considering all the bad things that were going on in Italian politics with the fights between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, the emperor's men and the Pope's men, who hated each other and were constantly killing each other and destroying each other's cities. So this is Matilda that he meets here. And across the stream, Matilda explains to him the phenomena of this earthly paradise, which is the Garden of Eden, and where creation is still in its perfect, uncorrupted form. Its seeds blow on the winds to germinate across the world. So in the Garden of Eden, the world is still in its uncorrupt form. The seeds of the plants blow in the winds to germinate across the world. It's a picture of the top of Mount Purgatory with the Garden of Eden. Canto 29, the symbolic heavenly procession. So the poets follow Matilda along the banks of the river Lethe until they come to the spectacle of a pageant representing Christianity in all the splendor of its revelation. It is a heavily allegorical procession, symbolizes the writers of the Bible, the core Christian values, and the church itself. The church militant in glorious finery, shown as a chariot drawn by a majestic griffin. Here's part of the pageant. The first part with the 24 elders that represent the books of the Old Testament, and also there's a lot of the imagery in the pageant is representative of the vision that St. John saw in Revelation. Here's another image of the pageant. You can see the griffin pulling the carriage or the cart. The extraordinary glory and power of the pageant nearly overwhelms Dante. This is part of the pageant also, the three theological virtues: dancing, faith, hope, and love. Canto 30. Beatrice. From the midst of the pageant, Beatrice emerges with her face veiled. She's being pulled in the cart in the carriage by the griffin. And his nerves failing, Dante looks to Virgil for support, but Virgil has disappeared. Virgil is gone. Beatrice addresses Dante. At that point, Dante breaks down crying because he had to lose his friend Virgil. But Beatrice addresses Dante, the moment which he has been longing for throughout all of hell and purgatory. To see Beatrice again is what he's been longing for. But she begins with a harsh rebuke. She scolds him, first of all, for crying and at Virgil's loss, and second of all, for falling into spiritual difficulties since her death. She needs him to truly repent of all the ways in which he went wrong. And Dante feels intensely conscious of his faults and starts weeping. Canto 31. Dante repents. Dante repents and confesses as he weeps. His confession means that he is ready to step into the river Lethe. It's a river that washes away. This is one of the two rivers that flows through the earthly paradise, through the Garden of Eden. And it washes away the memory of earlier sin, of all the sins he's committed in his life. Matilda, the other lady that's there, leads him into the river and baptizes him and leads him out on the far bank in front of Beatrice. So before this, he had been on the opposite bank from Beatrice, on the opposite side of the river. Now he's on the same side as her after he gets washed in the river Lethe, and his memories of his sins are washed away. He watches, filled with joy and love, as she unveils her face and reveals her radiance to him. Canto 32, the prophetic dream. So Dante and Statius join they go back to the pageant or the parade of the church militant, which they're seeing here in the Garden of Eden. So beneath the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it represents a harmony between the church and the empire. The pageant is like a parade or a Roman triumph in which all the figures passing by represent parts of the Christian faith and the history of the Roman and Holy Roman Empire in relation to it. So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is was in the center of the Garden of Eden, and it's the tree that Adam ate off of, is barren in the middle of the garden, and it represents the Roman Empire, okay, which was falling apart, right? Before the empire became Christian, you had the crisis of the 3rd century where the Roman Empire almost fell apart. And the carriage represents the church, which is pulled by the griffin, which represents Christ. Christ ties the carriage to the tree. He ties the church to the empire. This would be like the conversion of Constantine, which would be a good thing. But then an eagle comes down and gets into the carriage and spreads his feathers all over it, basically decorating the carriage with his feathers. So this represents the donation of Constantine and the corruption of the church through wealth and political power. The donation of Constantine, again, is the idea that Constantine gave the church the earthly power of the Roman emperor after he died, kind of in his will, and that the popes became almost like superior to the Roman emperors and became politicians and kings in their own might. And Dante sees that as being a very bad thing for the church and the main cause of corruption in the church. So here you can see the cart is tied to the tree, which is a good thing, because the church and the empire should work together for the good of the people, for peace and for truth. But the bad thing is the eagle. The eagle getting into the cart and then filling it with his feathers, which again is like the donation of Constantine, where the church becomes rich, wealthy, and powerful politically, and becomes corrupt as a result. And so this was the bad thing that happens later. And the carriage then turns into a monster, like the beast in Revelation. The whole vision at this point starts to resemble the vision in Revelation that St. John has. And the beast has many horns and is driven by a whore. Like in Revelation, it mentions the whore of Babylon, and also a giant. So the whore is representative of Pope Boniface VIII, who Dante dislikes greatly and places in hell, and who he feels he corrupted the church greatly. And the giant represents the King of France, Philip the Fair, who is working on basically kidnapping the Pope into France for his own political advantage. You heard of the Babylonian papacy, or the Babylonian exile of the papacy, I should say. So Dante falls asleep, and when he wakes up, Beatrice tells him to watch what happens next and write about it. And when he returns to his earthly life, a series of disasters befall the chariot that represent the church, and it is turned from a dignified chariot into a damaged monster. Canto 33. So the previous part of the pageant was showing basically the history of the church and the empire, and how things started out as good when they were united together, but how it became corrupted when the church became powerful and wealthy. And then how a bad Pope, Boniface VIII, and a bad King of France, who was opposing the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, were leading the church astray. Okay, so Canto 33 then is a prophecy about a deliverer who will restore the church and the empire to their correct place. So Statius and Dante, so remember Virgil is now gone, so Statius is the only other poet with Dante at this point, go with Beatrice and Matilda. Beatrice tells Dante that a deliverer will come to right these wrongs committed against the church, and that he must spread the prophetic word of this. She says that it is a great sin to struggle against the tree, or the empire, and that a new Roman emperor will come who will set things right with a strong empire. So, and at at Dante's time, the King of France was heavily involved in Italian politics, and he was gaining power in Italy over against the empire, and Dante sees that as a very bad thing. He thinks that the emperor is basically ordained by God, and anybody who opposes it, including the King of France, is evil, and even the Pope. All right, so he'll set things right with a strong empire, and a purified, unworldly church that is focused on spiritual things and has the spirit of St. Francis, which is poverty. And it won't be a church that anymore that is concentrated on political power or gaining wealth. Dante struggles to take it all in, so Beatrice gets him to enter the river Eno. Eno brings the memories back of a person's virtues and the good things you did in life, as its twin river, the Lethe, washes away the remembrance of one's sins. Thus fortified, Dante is ready to be shown the answers to all the holy mysteries and to proceed on into heaven.